I'm Aina, 63 years old, and a retired elementary school teacher. My life revolves around my family, especially my son Matthew and his wife Karen. They mean the world to me. Today started like any ordinary day. I was heading to Karen's family celebration and stopped at Walker's family grocery for a cake. But what happened next changed everything. The cashier grabbed my hand, leaned in close, and whispered something about Matthew that made my blood run cold. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button while I explain how a simple cake purchase turned into a discovery that would shake our entire family to its core. Life in Portland has been good to me. After teaching for 35 years at Pinewood Elementary, I settled into a peaceful retirement. My husband Frank passed away 5 years ago from heart failure, leaving me alone in our two-bedroom house where we'd raised our only son Matthew. Matthew is 38 now, a successful financial advisor at Northwest Investment Partners. He married Karen 10 years ago in a beautiful ceremony at Cathedral Park under the St. John's Bridge. I remember how happy they were that day, so full of hope and plans for their future together. Those plans included children, but life had other ideas. After years of fertility treatments and 3 devastating miscarriages, Matthew and Karen decided to adopt. That's how Justin came into our lives 7 years ago, a tiny 6-month-old with curious brown eyes and the sweetest smile you could imagine. Justin immediately became the center of our world. I babysit him every Tuesday and Thursday, while Karen works as a physical therapist at Providence Medical Center. We have our special traditions, making pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, visiting the duck pond at Laurelhurst Park, and reading the same bedtime stories I once read to Matthew. Grandma Aina. He calls me, tell me about when Daddy was little. And I share stories about Matthew growing up, hoping Justin sees the same good qualities in his father that I've always seen. Or thought I saw. Lately though, something has been different about Matthew. He's been working late, more often coming home after Justin is already asleep. During family dinners, he seems distracted, constantly checking his phone, smiling at messages from what he claims are clients. When Karen asks about his day, his answers have become vague, generic. I've noticed Karen's growing resentment. Last week, when I was over for dinner, she snapped at him when he announced yet another weekend business trip. Of course, she said, voice tight with anger. Why would I expect you to be here? Justin has a soccer game Saturday, but I'm sure your mysterious clients are more important. Matthew had the decency to look guilty, but didn't cancel his trip. This weekend was supposed to be different. Karen's parents were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary with a family gathering at their lakeside cabin in Hood River. Everyone would be there. Karen's 2 sisters with their families, her grandparents from Tucson, even her cousins from Boston. Matthew had promised weeks ago that nothing would interfere with this important family event. I'd offered to drive separately and meet them there, partly because I wanted to give them time alone together on the 2-hour drive. Maybe they could reconnect, have a meaningful conversation without distractions. Also, I'd promised to bring one of my special strawberry shortcake layer cakes, Karen's mother's favorite. That's why I stopped at Walker's family grocery on Friday afternoon. Walker's has been my go-to store for decades. It's one of those family-owned places that somehow survives despite the big chains moving in. They have the freshest strawberries in spring, and I needed perfect ones for the cake. I was taking my time carefully selecting each ingredient. Organic flour, real vanilla extract, heavy cream for whipping. I felt someone watching me as I examined the strawberries. Looking up, I caught the eye of Tanya, one of the longtime cashiers. She quickly looked away and continued scanning items for another customer. Tanya had worked at Walker's for at least 15 years. Our interactions had always been pleasant but superficial. The kind of familiarity you develop with people you see regularly, but don't really know. She was in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair, always pulled back in a practical ponytail, usually wearing bright-colored reading glasses on a chain around her neck. As I filled my basket with the remaining ingredients, I couldn't shake the feeling that Tanya was watching me. Maybe I was being paranoid, but something about her expression seemed off. Concerned, maybe even pitying. I went about my shopping, adding decorative sprinkles and candles for the cake. I'd be baking it that evening at home before driving to Hood River the next morning. Karen's parents deserved something special for 40 years of marriage, a milestone Frank and I never reached. The store wasn't busy that afternoon. Only 2 checkout lanes were open, and Tanya was working one of them. As I approached, she gave me a tight smile and began scanning my items. Her movements seemed mechanical, and she avoided eye contact. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I said, trying to fill the awkward silence. "Yes, Mrs. Wilson," she replied, using my last name, though we'd known each other for years. "How's your family doing?" "Everyone's fine," I said. "My son's family is heading to Hood River this weekend for a celebration. That's what the cake ingredients are for." At the mention of my son, Tanya's hands paused ever so slightly on the carton of eggs she was scanning. She glanced up, then back down quickly. Something was definitely off. I paid using my credit card, signed the receipt, and was gathering my bags when it happened. Tanya reached out suddenly, her hand closing around my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, holding me in place. "Mrs. Wilson," she whispered, leaning across the counter, "I need to tell you something about your son. Your son is having an affair with my niece. She doesn't know he's married with a child." The words hung in the air between us as my mind struggled to process them. Matthew. It couldn't be true. "I don't understand." I stammered, my voice barely audible. Around us, the store continued its normal afternoon routine. The beep of scanners, the squeak of shopping cart wheels, the background music playing something vaguely country. Tanya glanced around quickly, then pulled her phone from her apron pocket. "I shouldn't be doing this, but you need to see." She swiped through several photos and stopped on one that made my heart drop. There was Matthew, my son, sitting at a restaurant table, his hand covering a young woman's. They were looking at each other with unmistakable intimacy. The woman was pretty, with long auburn hair and a bright smile. She couldn't have been more than 30. "That's my niece Allison," Tanya said softly. "She's 27, teaches kindergarten at Sunnyside Elementary. She thinks your son is single. She's been dating him for months now." I pulled my hand away, nearly knocking over my shopping bags. There must be some mistake. Matthew is happily married. He and Karen have a son. Tanya shook her head sadly. "I've seen them together at least a dozen times. At Riverside Bistro, at that new wine bar on Hawthorne. 2 weeks ago, they were at my brother's birthday dinner. Matthew told everyone he was an investment advisor who had just moved back to Portland after working in Chicago for years." My hands began to tremble. "That's impossible. Matthew has never lived in Chicago." Allison mentioned they're planning a weekend trip to the coast next month. She's so excited about it. She's been showing everyone the brochures for this fancy resort in Cannon Beach next month. That would be right around Justin's birthday. Matthew had already promised to take the day off work, said they'd go to the Science Museum, have a special father-son day. I wasn't going to say anything. Tanya continued, her voice dropping even lower as another customer approached the checkout. "But then I recognized you, and I started thinking about that poor woman and their child. My sister went through something similar years ago. By the time she found out her husband was cheating, he'd emptied their savings account and disappeared. I couldn't let that happen to your daughter-in-law." "Karen," I said mechanically. "Her name is Karen." Tanya nodded. "Allison is a good person. She would never knowingly date a married man. She thinks she's found someone special, talks about a future together." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the checkout counter to steady myself. "They're meeting today," Tanya said, glancing at the wall clock behind her register. 4 o'clock at Rosewood Cafe just across the street. Allison took the afternoon off to get her hair done first. She thinks he's going to propose. Propose? My mind couldn't grasp it. Matthew was already married. He had a son, a family. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Tanya said, looking genuinely remorseful. But I thought you should know. What you do with the information is up to you. The customer behind me cleared his throat impatiently. I mumbled an apology and gathered my bags, moving away from the counter in a daze. Instead of heading to the front exit, I turned toward the back of the store. I needed time to think, to process this information before deciding what to do next. Walking through the dairy section past the deli counter, I pushed through the swinging doors marked "Employees Only" that led to the loading dock. No one stopped me. The back area was empty, except for a few stacked pallets. I slipped outside into the small parking area where delivery trucks unloaded. It was 3:45 p.m. The Rosewood Cafe was directly across the side street, its red awning visible from where I stood. Without fully forming a conscious plan, I found myself crossing the street, looking for somewhere inconspicuous to watch the cafe entrance. There was a small courtyard with benches adjacent to the cafe, partially screened by decorative shrubs. I settled on a bench with a clear view of the entrance, but where I would be difficult to spot from the street. Was I really going to spy on my own son? The thought made me sick to my stomach. This was Matthew, my only child, the boy I'd raised with such care after Frank's long absences for work, the boy who'd helped me nurse Frank through his final illness. I should call him right now, I thought, pulling out my phone. Ask him directly about Tanya's accusations. But what if he lied? What if Tanya was mistaken? What if this was all some bizarre misunderstanding I needed to see for myself? At precisely 4 o'clock, a sleek grey Audi pulled into the small parking lot beside the cafe. Matthew's car. My heart raced as he stepped out, smoothing his navy blue suit jacket. He looked exactly as he always did when leaving his downtown office. Polished, professional, successful. Except for one detail that made my breath catch. As he approached the cafe entrance, he paused, glanced around, and then carefully removed his wedding ring, slipping it into his pocket. That single gesture confirmed everything. My stomach churned with a mixture of disbelief, disappointment, and growing anger. 5 minutes later, a young woman approached from the opposite direction. I recognized her immediately from the photo Tanya had shown me. Allison, with her auburn hair, now styled in loose waves, wearing a pretty floral dress. She was carrying a small gift bag. They met outside the cafe entrance. Matthew's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. The kind of smile I hadn't seen him direct at Karen in months. He pulled Allison into an embrace that lasted too long to be casual, then kissed her in a way that made me turn away briefly in pain. I watched them enter the cafe together, Matthew's hand resting intimately on the small of her back. Through the large front windows, I could see them being seated at a table. Matthew was pulling out her chair, leaning down to say something in her ear that made her laugh. They looked happy. They looked in love. As they settled in, ordering drinks, talking animatedly, I felt physically ill. The Matthew inside that cafe was a stranger to me. I could see him clearly through the window, reaching across the table to take Allison's hands, his face open and affectionate, in a way it hadn't been with Karen in too long. After their first drinks arrived, Matthew pulled a small box from his jacket pocket. Too large for a ring, thankfully, but obviously jewelry. Allison opened it and gasped, lifting out a delicate gold necklace with some kind of pendant. She immediately stood up, moved to his side of the table, and hugged him tightly, then turned around for him to fasten it around her neck. I couldn't watch anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone, trying to put it back in my purse. Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled back across the street toward the grocery store parking lot, where my car was still waiting, the cake ingredients forgotten inside. Once inside my car, I couldn't bring myself to start the engine. My whole body was trembling, and tears were streaming down my face. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This couldn't be happening. Not to our family. Not my Matthew. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. The son I thought I knew would never do this. Matthew had always been the good one, the responsible one. Even as a teenager, when his friends were getting into trouble, Matthew stayed focused on his goals. He'd been class president, graduated with honors, earned a full scholarship to college. "You've raised a fine young man," Mrs. Wilson, his high school principal, had told me at graduation. A young man of character. Character. The word echoed painfully in my mind. Where was that character now? Maybe it was my fault somehow. Had I missed something crucial in raising him? Had I been too lenient after Frank's early betrayal? Frank. The memory surfaced unwanted. Our 5th wedding anniversary. Finding the receipt for women's perfume when Frank claimed to be working late. The lipstick stain on his collar. The predictable, pathetic denials. Then finally the tearful confession. We'd worked through it. Counseling. Renewed commitment. Frank had never strayed again, had become a devoted husband for the remaining 35 years of our marriage. I'd forgiven him eventually. We'd built a good life together. But the scar remained. And now it seemed like some twisted family pattern was repeating itself with Matthew. Except worse, Frank's affair had been brief, with a co-worker before we had children. Matthew was leading a full double life, deceiving both Karen and this innocent young teacher who thought she'd found someone special. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Karen's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before answering. "Aina, are you on your way yet?" Karen's voice was warm, expectant. I'm having a bit of car trouble." I lied, hating myself for it, but knowing I couldn't possibly drive to Hood River now. "I'm going to have it checked out. I might be delayed until tomorrow morning." "Oh no, do you need Matthew to come look at it? He just texted that his meeting is running late, but I'm sure he could swing by." His meeting? I closed my eyes, picturing him sitting across from Allison in that cafe. No, it's probably just the battery. I'll call my roadside assistance. Don't worry about me." "Are you sure you sound upset?" "Just frustrated about the car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You go ahead and enjoy the evening with your family. I'll be there tomorrow." After hanging up, I sat motionless for several more minutes. Then I started the car and drove. Not home, but to Waterfront Park. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what to do with this horrible knowledge. The park was quiet on this spring afternoon. I found a bench overlooking the Willamette River and sat watching the water flow past my mind, churning with memories and questions. I thought about Justin, his little face lighting up whenever Matthew came home from work. "Daddy's here," he would shout, running to the door. Justin, who had already experienced one form of abandonment as an infant before being adopted into what was supposed to be his forever family. I remembered the day they'd brought him home. Matthew had been so nervous, asking me 1,000 questions about baby care. He'd painted the nursery himself, assembled the crib, baby-proofed the entire house. He'd been so determined to be the perfect father. "I want to give him everything I had growing up, Mom," he'd told me. The security, the love, the stability. Stability. The word was bitter now. And Karen, dear, strong Karen, who had endured so much in her desire to become a mother. The fertility treatments, the heartbreaking miscarriages, the emotional roller coaster of the adoption process. Through it all, she'd believed Matthew was her rock, her partner. They'd made every decision together, supported each other through the hardest moments. Now he was planning a weekend getaway with another woman, while Karen was at home taking care of their son. While she was planning family events, maintaining their home, juggling work and motherhood. The sun was beginning to set over the river when I finally made my decision. I couldn't tell Karen not yet, not before confronting Matthew. Despite everything, he was still my son. I needed to hear his side, understand how he could have done this, give him the chance to make it right. I would go to his office tomorrow morning. Fridays, he usually worked until noon before taking clients to lunch. I would catch him before he could escape to Allison, or make up some excuse to Karen about working late again. As for tonight, I would go home, try to sleep and prepare myself for what would surely be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. The next morning, I arrived at Northwest Investment Partners just before 11:30. I hadn't slept more than an hour or two, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say to Matthew. By morning, I felt hollowed out but determined. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Wilson, how nice to see you. Matthew didn't mention you were coming by today." "It's a surprise," I said, forcing a smile. "Is he available?" "He's just finishing up a call. I'll let him know you're here." A few minutes later, Matthew emerged from his corner office looking surprised but pleased to see me. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit with a blue tie that Karen had given him for Christmas. "Mom, what brings you downtown?" He leaned in to kiss my cheek. The familiar scent of his cologne, the same one Frank had worn, made my heart ache. "I thought we could have lunch," I said, keeping my voice light. He glanced at his watch, frowning slightly. "I actually have a client meeting at noon." "Cancel it." The firmness in my voice surprised us both. "Please, Matthew. It's important." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Let me make a quick call." While he stepped away, I noticed a framed photo on the reception area wall, the company staff at some charity event. Matthew stood in the front row, Karen beside him in a black dress, both smiling. A perfect couple. "All set," he said, returning. "There's a deli around the corner, or we could go to—" "Let's walk to the park," I interrupted. I'm not hungry." We took the elevator down in silence. Matthew tried small talk about the weather, about Justin's latest soccer game, about Karen's parents' anniversary. Each word from him felt like a small betrayal. How could he stand there chatting casually when he was living such a profound lie? Jefferson Park was only 2 blocks from his office building. We found an empty bench away from the main pathways underneath a large maple tree. Spring leaves filtered the sunlight, casting dappled shadows across the ground. "Mom, what's going on?" Matthew asked when we were seated. "You're starting to worry me. Is it your health? Is something wrong?" I turned to face him directly. "I saw you yesterday, Matthew." "Yesterday, I was at work all day, then had a client dinner." His voice trailed off as something in my expression stopped him. "I saw you at Rosewood Cafe with Allison." The color drained from his face. For a long moment, he said nothing, his mouth opening and closing, without producing any sound. Who told you about—" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "Does it matter? I saw you remove your wedding ring before meeting her. I saw you give her a necklace. I saw the way you looked at her." My voice broke slightly. "I saw everything, Matthew." He stared at the ground, shoulders slumped. When he finally looked up, there was anger in his eyes. "You were spying on me, following me around town. Don't you dare make me the villain here." I said sharply. "You're having an affair, lying to your wife, to your son, to this poor young woman who doesn't even know you're married. And you're upset about being seen." The anger drained away as quickly as it had appeared. Matthew's face crumpled, and suddenly he looked very young, like the little boy who had come to me in tears after breaking a neighbor's window with his baseball. "It's not what you think," he said weakly. "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Explain how it's acceptable to betray Karen this way, to risk your family, your son's security and happiness." He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was barely audible. "I never meant for it to happen. It started as just a conversation at a coffee shop. She was grading papers at the next table. We talked about books we were reading. It was so easy, so natural." He paused, swallowing hard. "I didn't tell her I was married that first time. Or the second. By the third time we met, it seemed too late. Too late to be honest. Too late to walk away." He winced at my words. "You don't understand what it's been like at home. Karen and we barely talk anymore, except about Justin or household logistics. She's always tired or stressed. When I try to touch her, she pulls away. So this is Karen's fault." I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "No, that's not what I'm saying." Matthew stood up abruptly, pacing in front of the bench. "But with Allison, I feel appreciated. I feel like me again, not just a provider or a co-parent. She listens when I talk. She laughs at my jokes. She makes me feel alive. The word stung. And Karen made you feel alive once too. Before the fertility struggles, before the stress of adoption, before the realities of parenthood. That's how relationships work, Matthew. The excitement ebbs and flows. You work through the hard times together. Like you and Dad did. He shot back. I froze. What does that mean? I heard you two fighting about it once. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard Mom. The woman's name was Susan. The old pain resurfaced briefly. Yes, your father made a mistake early in our marriage, and we worked through it. We rebuilt our trust. We stayed committed to each other and to you. And you were happy, truly happy after that. We had a good marriage, Matthew. Not perfect, but good. We loved each other until the day he died. Matthew sat back down heavily. It's been going on for 8 months, he admitted. Allison thinks I'm going to propose soon. She's talking about children, about building a life together. And what about the life you've already built with Karen? With Justin? He was silent again, staring at his hands. I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring today either. I'm going to ask Karen for a divorce after her parents' anniversary weekend, he said finally. I've already talked to a lawyer about custody arrangements for Justin. The words hit me like physical blows. Custody arrangements. You're planning to split up your family, traumatize your son, and you've already consulted a lawyer? I'm thinking of seeking primary custody. He continued, his voice growing firmer. My work schedule is more flexible than Karen's. I make more money. I can provide better for him. You can't be serious. I was aghast. You would take Justin away from his mother after everything she's done for him, for your family. Allison is great with kids, Matthew said defensively. She's a kindergarten teacher. Justin would adjust. I stood up, trembling with rage. Listen to yourself. You're talking about replacing your son's mother with your mistress. Do you have any idea what that would do to Justin? To Karen. I still care about Karen, he insisted. I don't want to hurt her, but I'm not in love with her anymore. Don't I deserve to be happy? Happiness built on deception and betrayal isn't real happiness, Matthew. It's selfishness. It's delusion. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. And what about Allison? Does she know she's building her dreams on the ruins of another woman's life? Does she know she's dating a man who can lie so easily to his wife, his son, his mother? Matthew flinched. Allison is different. What we have is special. What you have is an affair, a fantasy. Real relationships involve compromise, sacrifice, commitment. When things get hard, I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. I raised you better than this, Matthew. Your father and I taught you about honor, about keeping your word, about family coming first. Mom, wait. He reached for my arm. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell Karen? I looked at my son, this man I thought I knew so well, and felt an overwhelming sadness. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I do know this, I won't help you deceive Karen or Justin. And I won't stand by while you hurt that young woman either. She deserves to know the truth about who she's really dating. I walked away, leaving him on the bench, his head in his hands. My heart was breaking for all of us, for Karen and Justin, for Matthew himself, even for Allison, who had unwittingly become part of this painful situation. As I reached the park exit, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tanya at the grocery store. Allison is devastated that Matthew cancelled their lunch today. She's worried something's wrong. She asked if I thought she should surprise him at his office. I said I'd get back to her. Looking back over my shoulder at Matthew still sitting on the bench, I made another difficult decision. I texted back, please ask Allison if she can meet me. There's something she needs to know. That night was the longest of my life. After returning home from the confrontation with Matthew, I'd barely made it through my front door before collapsing on the sofa, physically and emotionally exhausted. The meeting with Allison had been even more difficult than I'd anticipated. We'd met at a small coffee shop, far from both Matthew's office and her school. When I introduced myself as Matthew's mother, her face had lit up with pleased surprise. That light had died quickly as I gently explained the reality of Matthew's situation. Married, she'd repeated, as if the word itself was foreign. With a son. Her hands had begun to shake so badly she'd spilled her coffee across the table. I'd shown her family photos from my wallet. Matthew and Karen at Justin's kindergarten graduation, the three of them, on their last vacation to the Oregon coast. He told me he lived with his sick mother. Allison had said, tears streaming down her face. He said that's why he couldn't have me over to his place yet, why we always met at restaurants or my apartment. He said you were recovering from cancer treatment and needed quiet privacy. The calculated nature of Matthew's lies had shocked me. Using me as his excuse, manipulating this young woman's sympathy. He talked about our future. Allison had continued, anger beginning to replace her shock. About having children together, buying a house in Lake Oswego. He said he was saving for a ring. I'd reached across the table, then taking her trembling hands in mine. I'm so sorry, Allison. You deserved better than this. You did nothing wrong. 8 months, she'd whispered. 8 months of my life given to what, a fantasy? A man who doesn't even exist. She'd fingered the gold necklace at her throat, the one I'd watched Matthew give her yesterday, then yanked it off, suddenly thrusting it toward me. I don't want anything from him. Tell him I never want to see him again. After Allison had left, I'd sat alone in the coffee shop, the discarded necklace heavy in my palm. I didn't want it, this physical evidence of my son's betrayal, but I couldn't leave it behind either. Now, as I lay on my sofa staring at the ceiling, my phone rang. Karen's name appeared on the screen again. I almost didn't answer, not trusting myself to speak to her, without revealing everything. But concern won out. Karen, is everything okay? Her voice was tight with controlled tears. Matthew didn't come home last night. He's not answering his phone. His assistant said he left the office early, cancelled all his appointments. I'm worried something's happened to him. My stomach clenched with guilt and worry. Where was Matthew now? What might he do after being confronted about his double life? I'm coming over, I said without hesitation. Stay with Justin. Try to keep things normal for him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I found Karen pacing in her kitchen, phone clutched in her hand. Justin was in the living room watching cartoons, blissfully unaware of the tension. Have you heard from him? Karen asked immediately. I shook my head. When did you last speak? Yesterday morning before he left for work. He texted in the afternoon saying he'd be home for dinner, but then called later with some excuse about a client emergency. Her voice caught. I thought he was just working late again. Looking at Karen's worried face, I realized she already suspected something. Maybe not the full truth, but enough to recognize that Matthew's behavior had changed significantly. Karen, I need to ask you something personal. Have you noticed anything unusual about Matthew lately? Beyond the late nights. She sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking exhausted. He's distant, distracted, always on his phone, but he turns the screen away when I come near. He's taken 3 weekend trips in the last 2 months for conferences, but brought back no materials, had no stories to share. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears. I found receipts, Anna. Dinner for 2 at restaurants I've never been to. A hotel reservation downtown when he was supposedly in Seattle. You think he's having an affair? I said quietly. Karen nodded, a tear spilling down her cheek. I didn't want to believe it. I've been telling myself I'm paranoid, that there could be other explanations. I took a deep breath, then reached for her tablet sitting on the kitchen counter. May I? She looked confused but nodded. I opened her web browser and typed in a search for Allison Bennett, kindergarten teacher at Sunnyside Elementary. Her school profile appeared, showing a smiling young woman with auburn hair standing in a colorful classroom. Karen's sharp intake of breath told me she recognized the woman, perhaps from glimpsing her in Matthew's texts or photos. Who is she? Her name is Allison. She's been dating Matthew for 8 months. She didn't know he was married. Karen stared at the screen, then at me. How do you know this? How long have you known? I explained everything then. The encounter with Tanya, witnessing Matthew and Allison at the cafe, my confrontation with Matthew in the park, and finally my meeting with Allison. Throughout my account, Karen remained unnaturally still, her face growing paler with each new detail. He's planning to ask for divorce, she whispered when I finished. And custody of Justin. That's what he said yesterday. But Allison knows the truth now. She ended things immediately. Karen stood suddenly moving to the kitchen window that overlooked their backyard. Justin's swing set was visible gently moving in the spring breeze. What am I supposed to do now? Her voice was hollow. How do I tell my son his father has been living a double life? How do we go to my parents' anniversary celebration tomorrow pretending everything is fine? I moved to stand beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You don't have to pretend anything. We can call your parents, explain that there's a family emergency. They'll understand. She turned to face me, her expression hardening with resolve. No, I won't let Matthew's actions ruin their celebration. My parents have been looking forward to this for months. All my relatives are already there, or on their way. She straightened her shoulders. I'll go without him. I'll say he's ill, had to stay home. I can handle one weekend of pretending for my parents' sake. I'll come with you, I offered, for support. Karen surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. You're a good mother, Aina, to Matthew and to me too. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. I don't blame you for any of this. I want you to know that. I raised him, I said quietly. I must have gone wrong somewhere. No. Her voice was firm. Matthew made his own choices, and now he'll have to live with the consequences. As if summoned by our conversation, Karen's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable. It's him. Says he's staying at the Riverside Hotel downtown. Needs time to think. He'll call tomorrow. She set the phone down with deliberate care. I suppose I should be grateful he's alive at least. From the living room, Justin called out, Mom, can I have some juice? Karen closed her eyes briefly, took a deep breath, then answered with forced cheerfulness, Coming, sweetheart? Before leaving the kitchen, she looked back at me. One day at a time, right? I nodded, admiring her strength in the face of such devastating news. One day at a time. 6 months later, I was back at Waterfront Park watching Justin chase a flock of geese along the riverbank. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the maple trees along the path blazing with red and gold leaves. Not too close to the water, Justin. Karen called from the bench beside me. I know, Mom, he called back, but stepped away from the edge obediently. So much had changed since that spring day when I'd confronted Matthew in this same park. The first weeks after the revelation had been brutal. Matthew had initially been furious with me for interfering in his life, for meeting with Allison. He hadn't spoken to me for nearly a month. Karen had filed for divorce almost immediately, seeking full custody of Justin. Matthew had contested it briefly, then given in when his lawyer explained how his infidelity and deception would appear to a family court judge. Justin had been confused and heartbroken when told his parents were separating. He'd asked the questions children always ask. Was it his fault? Did Daddy not love him anymore? Would he have to move schools? Karen and I had worked together to reassure him to maintain as much stability as possible in his life. I'd worried that Karen would cut me out of Justin's life, associate me too closely with Matthew's betrayal. Instead, she'd leaned on me more than ever. I started keeping Justin 3 days a week instead of 2, giving Karen time for her therapy sessions and the extra shifts she'd taken on at the physical therapy center to make ends meet. Matthew had moved into a downtown apartment. Those first few weeks, he'd called me repeatedly, alternating between anger and self-pity. You've turned my entire family against me, he'd accused during one particularly difficult conversation. You did that yourself, I'd responded calmly. With your choices. The turning point had come unexpectedly. One evening in July, Matthew had shown up at my door, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed. "I lost my job," he'd said simply. "Too many missed days, too many mistakes. Clients requesting different advisors." I'd let him in, made coffee, and listened as the full weight of his actions finally seemed to hit him. "I've destroyed everything," he'd said, his voice breaking. "My marriage, my career, my relationship with Justin. He barely speaks to me during our weekends together. And for what, Allison won't take my calls. She's moved to Seattle, according to her aunt." "What did you expect, Matthew? That everyone would rearrange their lives to accommodate your lies?" He'd flinched at my directness but nodded slowly. I think I need help, Mom. Professional help. I don't recognize the person I've become." That night had marked the beginning of Matthew's long journey toward redemption. He'd started therapy, joined a support group for divorced fathers, and eventually found a new job at a smaller investment firm. He'd written letters of apology to Karen, to Allison through her aunt, and even to me. Our relationship had begun to heal, though it would never be quite the same. The unquestioning trust was gone, replaced by a more cautious, conditional bond. But he was still my son, and I still loved him. Karen had shown remarkable resilience throughout the ordeal. After the initial shock and pain, she'd thrown herself into creating a stable, happy life for Justin and herself. She joined a single-parent support group, reconnected with old friends, even started taking a photography class she'd always been interested in, but never had time for during her marriage. 2 months ago, she'd mentioned casually that she'd had coffee with a doctor from her clinic. Not a date, she'd insisted, when I raised an eyebrow. Just coffee. But I'd noticed a new lightness in her step since then, a return of the sparkle in her eyes that had been missing for so long. Most importantly, Justin was doing well. The initial confusion and sadness had gradually given way to acceptance of his new normal. Weekdays and most weekends, with Mom every other weekend, and Wednesday dinners with Dad. He saw a child psychologist twice a month who reported that he was adjusting as well as could be expected. "Penny for your thoughts," Karen said, now interrupting my reflections. I smiled, watching Justin, who had abandoned the geese and was now collecting colorful leaves. "Just thinking about how far we've all come. It's hard to believe it's been only 6 months, she agreed. "Sometimes it feels like another lifetime." "Are you ready for tomorrow?" I asked gently. Tomorrow would be a milestone. The first time since the separation that Matthew, Karen, and Justin would have dinner together at a neutral restaurant with me present as a buffer. Matthew's therapist had suggested it as a step toward healthier co-parenting. "As ready as I'll ever be," Karen sighed. "Justin's excited about it. That's what matters." "Matthew seems nervous," I offered. "He called me twice yesterday, asking what he should wear, if he should bring Justin a gift." Karen's expression softened slightly. "He is trying, isn't he? In his own way?" "Yes, he is." I hesitated before adding, "He asked me last week if I thought you'd ever forgive him." "What did you tell him?" "That forgiveness doesn't happen on a schedule, and that earning it back takes consistent action, not just words or wishes." She nodded thoughtfully. Wise advice. She watched Justin for a moment, then said, "I'm not there yet, but I can imagine a day when I might be." For Justin's sake, if nothing else. Justin came running back, then, hands full of leaves in every shade of autumn. "Look what I found. Can we take them home and press them in a book like you showed me, Grandma Ina?" "Of course we can, sweetheart," I said, making room for him on the bench between us. As he chattered excitedly about his leaf collection, I caught Karen's eye over his head. We shared a small smile of understanding, an acknowledgement of the painful journey we'd traveled together and the uncertain but hopeful path ahead. Later that evening, after dropping Karen and Justin at their home, I drove back to my own quiet house. The answering machine was blinking. A message from Matthew, confirming our dinner plans for tomorrow, his voice tentative but determined. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table looking at the framed photos on my wall. Frank and me on our 30th anniversary. Matthew's college graduation, Justin's adoption day, the whole family beaming with joy. Family. Despite everything, we were still a family, albeit a reconfigured one. Different, wounded, but healing. Moving forward, I thought about the many women who had watched my videos, shared their own stories of betrayal and recovery. Some of you are at the beginning of a journey similar to mine, just discovering a painful truth, feeling your world collapse around you. Others are further along the path, finding your way back to strength, to joy, to trust. Wherever you are in your journey, remember this. The hardest truths can lead to the most authentic love. Being a mother never ends even when your children are adults. And sometimes, true love means holding the people we care about accountable, not enabling their worst choices. If you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. How did you find your way through betrayal to healing? What advice would you give to others just starting this difficult journey? Please like and subscribe if the story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone. Thank you for listening. And remember, even after the darkest storms, the sun eventually returns.